HR isn't just about policies and payroll, it's about people. But when our tools are clunky and disconnected, it's hard to stay focused on what matters most. And I think we can all agree that people matter most. That's why we listen to my podcast in the first place, I hope. And this is ultimately why I'm super excited to tell you about Intuit QuickBooks Payroll. QuickBooks Payroll isn't just for accounting, and it will totally help you manage it all. QuickBooks Payroll brings everything together: payroll, time tracking, HR, and accounting, all in one seamless platform. That way, you can spend less time chasing data and more time supporting your team, all without switching systems or adding complexity to your already complex job. Let's be frank, your jobs are complex. We all know this. And I have to tell you, someone in my family has their own business and uses QuickBooks Payroll, and they love it because it integrates with everything. They have, ultimately within the integration, AI and automation handle all of the heavy lifting, but its connection for payroll, time, and accounting helps them to understand their full financial picture. So they love it and they swear by it. So this is why I'm also really excited to tell you about it, because I know someone who uses it. So make sure you have a system that works for you so that you can show up fully for your people, as we all commit to doing. Discover how QuickBooks Payroll can help you today. Learn more by going to quickbooks.com/payroll. That's quickbooks.com/payroll. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. And this week, we're talking a lot about expanding hiring beyond the U.S. borders, which tends to be a pretty important, interesting, critical topic, especially considering so many people kind of react to that, that topic sometimes with a little bit of fear, a little bit of uncertainty. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why expanding beyond our, maybe even our local borders is a really good strategy for business. So first and foremost, let me introduce to you my guest for this week, who is Laura Tolhoek. She is the founder and principal consultant at Essential HR, where she leads a team of experts delivering clear, results-focused solutions to businesses facing HR challenges. With over 20 years of experience, Laura has helped companies in the restaurant, food service, and retail industries improve performance through pragmatic, high-volume decision-making. As a certified HR leader, or CHRL, Laura specializes in guiding managers through complex HR issues, providing actionable solutions, and building confidence in the teams her company works with. She thrives navigating complex issues that arise in fast-paced industries and recognizes the tenacity required for a company, large or small, to be successful. Laura, thank you so much for joining me this week and for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And, you heard what I kind of led off with. A lot of people do kind of feel this sense of fear. Oh my gosh, am I going to lose my job via outsourcing? This is something I hear a lot about. I've heard it throughout my experience as an HR professional myself, where I've seen jobs go from US-based roles to outside of the US. And so we are going to focus this conversation on Canada, because that is where you are and that's your area of expertise. But what is your initial thought around that sense of fear and uncertainty that people have with regard to talent expansion, so to speak, in global hiring?
Yeah, especially in this day and age where people are looking for new markets, right? Companies are looking for new markets. They've expanded where they are and they're finding opportunities in different countries. So specifically, with our friends south of the border, Canada's really close. Now, political issues aside, typically it's been a very easy relationship. So a lot of companies from Canada are opening up operations in the US and vice versa. And so what we've been seeing on the Canadian side is a lot of people being hired by US companies using US HR principles. And I can name actually 3 people off the top of my head where they're like, hey, can you take a look at this offer letter that I got? And when it comes to employment law, even though the imaginary border is very thin, the employment law is very, very different. Canada works on a very big risk management when it comes to employment law and employment contracts. And so we thought what a great opportunity it was to start talking to, our HR friends and south of the border to say, hey guys, you guys know your systems in your state and in your country. Let us tell you a little bit about what's going on here, because we want to help you protect your businesses when you need to find salespeople in Ontario, or when you need to find, boots on the ground in Alberta, because it's a bit of a different game here. And we want to make sure you're covering your butt, especially at the start of the relationships, which is employment letters and employment
Yeah.
contracts.
Yeah, definitely. I worked at a company that had a pretty large cohort in Canada. We had operations in Canada, stores in Canada. I worked in retail at the time. And I learned so much about employment law there and
Mm-hmm.
so much about managing a workforce in Canada. And it is very different. And you'll hear, I'm sure you've heard this, a lot of Americans will compare British Columbia, the province of British Columbia, to California in
Yep.
terms of employment law, and Ontario, the province of Ontario, compared to New York
Yep.
in employment law. And I think for those who are listening who haven't had experience or exposure with Canadian provinces, there's the local law, just like we have in the US, and then there's the provincial law, just like in the US, if we consider state to state
Mm-hmm.
law and differences there. And then, of course, you have the national level laws. And it's really interesting because, of course, we're all part of North America, but the laws are so different and the
Yep.
rights for employees are so different. And there is a difference in terms of the exchange rate, too. So there is sometimes this, I know we'll talk about the pros and cons in terms of this
Yeah.
global expansion beyond the US, but there is sometimes an added benefit for US based companies to find really strong talent, just as they would find in the US, but
Mm-hmm.
at a lower price point in Canada. And obviously that happens in other countries too. But in Canada, you have similar to the US, like talent across the board.
Yep.
And again, sometimes at that lower price point because of the cost
Yep.
of living differences. Right.
And overall salaries, which we can get into
Right.
in a little
Right.
bit as
Yeah.
well.
Exactly. I'm curious when it comes to a company that is like thinking of establishing a business entity or operations in Canada, what are some pitfalls that they need to think about? Or maybe it's not even a pitfall.
Mhm.
What are things that they need to know could impact their operations? I
Yep.
ask this because at the start of my career, I worked in Target, and Target at one time did attempt to expand to Canada, and it didn't work. They tried it, it didn't work. They pulled out of
We
Canada,
were
and
so sad about that.
I
We still
know.
are sad. We are still very
I
sad about
know.
that.
I'm honestly, I'm kind of sad about it because it's like one of those things where it's like, if Target can't do it, like who can, right? But the thing
Yeah.
is, you can, like they
Yeah.
could. I think it seemed to me at least, and it sounds as I reflect on this, that there wasn't a clear, from their perspective, I'm totally assuming here because I was not involved in the project at all. I worked in stores in New Jersey. That they potentially did not have a full understanding of all of the operational differences in Canada versus in the US. And I think one of the challenges was distribution, and
Yeah.
also the actual ability to get product from one
Yeah.
place to another, and all of that. So
Yeah. I
I'll
think in that
pass to
case,
you.
from what I understand, it was in stock positioning, because you go to Target to buy one thing, but you come out with 8. And if there's not 7 other things on the shelf that you didn't know that you didn't need, or that you did need, then you're not doing Target right, because you're
Right.
not
I
doing
agree. I
all of those
agree.
things. So yeah, no, we were very sad about that. But there is a marked difference in how the employment relationships are to start in Canada. So some of those pros that we're talking about, why would you come across the border? Why would you be looking for talent in Canada? So like we said, if I were to start hiring and recruiting somebody in Utah, I don't really know the culture and the systems that people go to. So for example, in Ontario, if you're looking to hire somebody and you want to post a job, you go to Indeed. That's just how it is. I don't even like Indeed.
Mhm.
I can try 8 other job boards that I actually prefer, but I know as the candidate, say, where do you go to look for a job? It's Indeed. I don't know where they go in Utah. So when you start that relationship, you're like, where are people going to go look for these roles? The second piece of why you're looking to understand the cultural differences is the way people interact is going to be different based off of geography and based off of relationships. And for the most part, we're a pretty friendly country. But it's a
Yes.
lot easier when people already understand the tone and the pace of the operations. If you go out east to Halifax, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, slow your roll because nothing goes fast out in those provinces. If you're
Mhm.
downtown Toronto, you're wondering, what happened in the last 5 minutes because it's gone. And I remember being at a Starbucks a couple of years ago out east and being like, wow, like we're really not going anywhere fast today. And that's just the culture. So if you don't understand that and you come in as a high roller and let's get things done, you're gonna miss the mark in terms of the overall pace of the province.
Right.
So there's a few things that you're looking at that just give you an advantage to hiring from local talent. The other piece to this is that what we've seen when people are hiring Canadians for American companies is they're still using American employment contracts.
Oh, big mistake.
Employment contract law in Canada is so sticky. I mean, as an HR professional, we don't even like it because we're like,
Hmm.
well, everything can change on a dime. Termination contracts in Canada are very, very particular. So we don't have at will employment.
Hmm.
It is actually quite costly to terminate people in Canada if you don't have a really strong employment contract with a really strong termination clause.
Right.
And things in your employment contract can outright discount your whole employment contract. So if you have a few words in there, for example, like drug testing, if you say, you're subject to drug testing in your employment contract in Canada, it negates your whole employment contract. So you might as not have one at all. And then things turn to common law. So common law in I don't know if you guys use that term across the border, but
We do.
common
We
law
do.
yeah. So now you're not looking at 1 or 2 weeks pay in lieu of notice. You're looking at months on end, and it's really up to the courts to decide what you should be paying this person based off of
Right.
age, seniority, their level within the organization. So everything starts with that employment contract. So sometimes we've seen people come to us and like, hey, I just got this job. Can you show me? Can you take a look at my contract? And I was like, leave it as is because this is like this
Null
doesn't
and void, basically.
it's null and
Yeah.
void here. So if
Yeah.
anything happens to you as an employee, you got a ticket to write for yourself here because
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
really go after what you want as an employee, which is the second piece of the whole aspect is employees are given the benefit of the doubt and the bias.
Right.
It's not employer driven, it is employee driven. So courts always side to the employee, and that's why that relationship has to start out well.
Right. Right. No, that's really helpful. And it's interesting because pretty much every state, except for a handful in the United States, are at will states.
Mhm.
So it's a very different experience. While as true as it is that employment can end in the United States at any time when you're in an at will state, there is of course this litigiousness associated, and so companies are always advised to make decisions that have support that's
Yeah.
sound in terms of whether it's documentation, conversations, whatever, so that they can at least protect themselves because there isn't really anything stopping an employee from pursuing litigation against a company, even if it is an at will state, although outside of New York, California, maybe Massachusetts, and a couple other states, it's not super employee friendly. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, I share that as an antithetical example to Canada, and I am fully aware of how employee friendly Canada is,
Mhm.
especially in British Columbia and Ontario, but really all over,
Across the
um,
across the country,
across the
it's
board,
yeah.
right? Yeah, across the board. Um, the what's interesting, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, if if someone has received an offer letter but their background check doesn't clear, you can't just not hire them anymore. There are certain stipulations there, even,
Yeah.
right? Like you have to have certain verbiage, at least in the offer letter, that
Yeah.
constitutes the contingency, right? Is that
Yeah.
still
So
true?
because you can't necessarily discriminate based off of record of offense if that record of offense doesn't directly impact the role that
Right.
they're doing. So drunk driving, sure, you can't be a warehouse driver for us. Drunk driving for a cashier doesn't matter. So you have to prove that the offense actually has relevance to the current role. Theft can't be the cashier, probably can be the warehouse driver. Um, it's a little, it's not fun. It's not
Yeah.
fun when those
No.
conversations come up, and
Right.
especially when you're trying to decide if someone's issue 30 years ago is relevant to today, which
Yeah.
depending on the company you're working for and how much grace people have, yes or
Right.
no, I don't know.
Right. Right. No, that's totally fair. I think, that example, while it's relevant in both countries, the US and Canada, I think I share it because there is this common mistake made where it's like, oh, well, in the US, like,
Yeah,
the agreements have to be so sound, like, if it works here, it's going to work there.
yeah,
And that's just super, super not correct. And it really pays to get support in whatever country someone is looking to expand to
yeah,
ensure that from the moment these processes begin, like you said, at the start of employment with that contract, with the offer letter, whatever agreement someone might sign, to ensure that those things are airtight because it can be so difficult. And you mentioned before, the termination clauses and payment in lieu, and there is a whole termination process to be considerate of when you are employing someone in Canada, because
yeah,
in the US, there's no requirement, even in New York and California, to pay any severance whatsoever. You don't have to give any. This is going back to the at will, at will state requirements. There's absolutely no requirement for notice. There's no requirement for payment other than the regular wages that are owed. A lot of companies do offer severance, and they offer that severance in exchange for a release of claims.
sign and release. Yeah,
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 yep. Sign the rights away. In the severance agreement in Canada, it is a little bit different. You can have severance agreements, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly. However, those are a little bit different, and even regardless of that, you do potentially owe either notice or termination pay, or potentially both, depending on
yeah,
the circumstances.
yeah.
And
So
so that adds to it.
a lot of people would say, well, this sounds like a headache. Um, I'm just going to subcontract somebody, not make them
Mm,
employee. I'm just going to subcontract somebody, which sounds like a great idea. The problem is if you hire somebody from any province in Canada, you're subject to the laws of that province. So you're
right.
like, yeah, but I hired them in Arkansas. They hired them under a company in Arkansas. Doesn't matter. That's not how our government sees it. So great, you hired yourself a subcontractor. All is good as long as everything is good. That's a in any subcontractor relationship, all is good till it's not. So all of a sudden you're like, business is down, subcontractor isn't bringing in what we said that they needed to do. We're going to cut this relationship because it's a subcontractor. It's clean, but it's not. So up here, unfortunately, we can call them subcontractors or contractors or arm's length employees. But then we started with this new thing called dependent contractors. So if your subcontractor gets more than 75% of their income, give or take, so really they're working for you as a almost like an employee, they're called a dependent contractor. And
Interesting.
then the employee says, well, I don't like the way you just got rid of me. This is my sole income. What am I supposed to do? They go to the courts and the courts say, well, you weren't really a subcontractor. You're more like a dependent contractor because of these 8 out of 10 reasons. So then the company is now required to pay the severance and termination. And there's really no
Wow.
calculation to know how much. The
Wow.
courts say, you company, you decide how much you think you owe them, and we'll tell you if we think you're right. is kind of how it's running right now. But then in addition to that, if they're deemed actually an employee because their work was really like an employee, uh, they were performance managed like an employee. They were told when to show up. They were given all the resources like an employee. They weren't in charge of their own income per se. Like they were told you get $20 an hour and that's how much you get. If they were actually kind of like an employee, then the government's going to say, actually, they weren't a subcontractor. You still owe them
Wow. Yep.
termination. You still owe them severance. And you owe them all their vacation, overtime, and you're going to need to pay employment insurance and Canadian pension plan on all of that because they weren't really a subcontractor. They were an employee. So that line is also super sticky.
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah.
really work around it.
Yeah.
Well,
The classification issues are huge here too. I mean, I think companies do it often. They misclassify
yeah.
people often. It's easy to do. And that's interesting. I didn't know about dependent contractors in Canada. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's a fun one. It's like, well, how much are we supposed to put them? You figure it out and
You
we'll tell
figured
you if
out.
we like it.
Right. We'll see what
That being
sticks.
said, I'll change the conversation to talk about some of the positives because we can go a long time on all the differences that can
Yeah.
cause stress.
Yeah.
We have an excellent workforce. We have a great education system and really well-educated individuals coming out of our education system. I was speaking to another colleague, and we were talking about in the US, and we were talking about the differences of pay rates. And I think he was in New York, and he said you can't get a middle manager under 90,000 right now.
Yeah.
Like if you want a strong
That's
middle
true.
manager, you can't get one under 90,000. I was like, I could probably find a few between 70, 60, and 80 easily. Like that's kind of where the middle managers are sitting in most operations. So you can get a strong individual and then you tack on, I think we're at about 32, 35% exchange rate right now. I think it was up to 40, 45 a couple months ago. So if you tack on that bit of a discount on it, you're like, well, this could work out well for me. Yeah. And the great thing on this side of the border is that person gets a job offer, say for 90, 100,000 when they've been making 70 or 80, and they think the world is great. They think their company is great. It's a win-win for everybody all around. It builds the loyalty. It builds that engagement factor. So when you look at that piece of it, when you're looking at really well-educated individuals who are strong workers and who you can kind of get for a discounted rate thanks to that exchange rate, whose salaries are already lower than a lot of the metropolitan states in the US, there is a benefit to bringing in that cultural experience and having boots on the ground across the border.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. There is a certainly an intrinsic value there. And I think I said it earlier that the talent pool is very wide reaching in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar to the US. You can find people to fulfill a job in pretty much any title, in any role, in any industry across the US and in Canada, likely because of the education systems. You see that in other countries also, but there are also other countries that are really more specialized, whether it's like engineering or just maybe even more broadly STEM. Whereas in the US and Canada, you're seeing more of that breadth across the board and availability. Like there are people who are actively seeking those roles. I think sometimes what can be difficult in the US is not only the salary component, but also how quickly people are, like growing in their roles. And we're seeing, at least in the US, I'm sure it's the same pretty much all over, the number of generations in the workforce is like the largest ever. We still have boomers, for example, the boomer generation in the workforce, which means that there are fewer of those higher level roles available. And I have seen, at least in Canada, that sometimes filling those mid-level roles, which can sometimes be very difficult to fill in the US because either the salary is not right or the talent is not right, that in Canada there's more availability potentially. Of course, it depends on industry and things like that, but there's so much value from my perspective in looking at hiring globally. And I think we've done so much of this since COVID because a lot of companies went remote or have
Yeah.
thought about their hiring strategies differently. And going back to one of my initial statements that a lot of people feel this sense of fear and uncertainty, there's so much value in the world expanding and roles being available globally.
Mhm.
And instead of us being afraid of our roles being outsourced or whatever term we want to use, we have to see the opportunity to, especially for those of us in HR, learn about those other countries, learn about the talent pool in other countries, the employment laws in other countries, so that
Mhm.
we can also upskill and expand our knowledge to be able to support global teams. I mean, that's something on a resume that people would I
Yep.
think people would love to see and would love to be able to add to their resumes, is this global experience. So I think all of the positives that you shared are really intrinsic and make for a really cohesive hiring experience and
Yeah.
strategy too. And one thing that sometimes I find, at least, that companies in the US don't always think about is also that Montreal, or Quebec specifically, you have this whole other element where you have to have the language that is spoken in Quebec. You have to have French
Yeah.
Canadian like posters. So just like US, just like America, I should say English posters in the US and other parts of Canada, you also have to have things posted in French, and same with agreements and
Yeah.
things like that. And
French
that's
first.
also a
Yeah.
very, yeah, it's a very unique
And again,
reality.
very different culture. Very different culture in Quebec than even in New Brunswick and Ontario, which
Right, right.
kind of bookend them. And we even find that people in Quebec want Quebec people. So if you come
Yeah, it's
in
like more
as
insular, right?
yeah, if you come in as a Western Albertan to Quebec, it's not going to work out well for you because it's probably very similar to the U.S. The Western provinces are very specific in their needs and how they do things, and you get this infighting of, well, that's Toronto and this is Calgary and we don't do things like Toronto. So you tell them Toronto. So they you have to think differently with the cultural differences. If you're going to invest in people across the border, make sure you're investing where it's needed, because those cultural differences are actually surprisingly real. Despite the fact you're like, we're all North American, but
Hmm.
how we operate and how you get in and how you make an impact changes.
Yes, I think sometimes maybe it's like an American thing, but I think sometimes when we understand that countries are English speaking predominantly, right? That it's like, oh, the culture's the
Yeah,
same. English
yeah,
speaking country.
yeah,
You could say this, oh, the UK is the same, English speaking, but there's no truth to that. I
yeah,
mean, there are so many cultural differences just in the US alone, and English is not even like a formally recognized national language. And when we think about, like, in Canada, for example, an English speaking country in North America, there are such significant differences. And I think a lot of it comes down to the government. I mean, even in terms of the benefits and the ways in which the employees or the
yep,
residents, the citizens of Canada, have different accesses than people in the United States. It's just it makes for a different experience, a different
yeah,
living experience. The best example that I can think of is that women in Canada who go out on maternity leave, they get around a year, sometimes more, maybe they take a little less,
yeah,
but generally that's the average. And in the US, it fully depends on your state. In New
hmm,
York, you get 4 months roughly, and in other states, you don't get any paid leave. So,
blows my mind.
you have to take out private benefits, you have
Yeah.
to pay for short-term or long-term disability, and it's a very significant cultural difference.
So we have, like you said, the pregnancy and parental leave, and actually, there's an additional. I think it might be up to. So women can take up to 18 months, but they get the same amount of pay as 12 months,
Right. Right, right, right.
which is 55% of their annual salary. Uh, Men can take an additional 6 months after the woman. The idea
Wow.
is that they're supposed to be, the woman goes back to work and the man is now the sole caregiver for this child. And the idea is to try to kind of balance the force of
Uh-huh.
taking
Not just
care of
all women leaving the
not just
workforce.
all women leaving the workforce, and it's making men take a stand in, in their families as well. It's a really interesting concept, and you're seeing it
Yeah.
more and more. And it's really funny when it happens in like construction. And people are like, what
Like, what do
this
you
man
mean
is
you're going?
leaving? Like, and it also helps balance the force in the sense that women of childbearing age are not to be discriminated against because they're of child, but it still happens.
Yeah.
But now it's
Yeah.
like, well, that guy is 32. He's going to get a kid in the next 3 years. He's probably going to leave for 6 months too.
Right.
So it helps
Right.
balance
That's
that as
smart.
well. But then we have caregiver leaves. So family caregiver leaves for
Yeah, they're really good.
elder care leaves. And
Hmm.
so there's medical leaves. There's a lot of other things that are job protected leaves. Some of them you get employment insurance for, some of them you don't. Uh, we have typically 11 to 12 paid holidays in a year. Vacation in Ontario and most of the other provinces starts at 2 weeks paid vacation up to 3 weeks after 5 years. So all of those things have to be taken into account. Now, we don't have the same costs in terms of health insurance that
Right.
the Americans do. Our health insurance is typically lower that the employer pays, but you do have to pay employment insurance, and you have to pay Canada Pension Plan, and you have to pay for workplace accident insurance. So you're looking at an additional 10 to 15% on the hourly wage that you're paying in taxes on behalf of the employee. So those
Right.
things also need to be taken into account, but that's
Right.
what kind of pays for all of those leaves.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's still lower with the exchange rate. It's still
It's still
potentially more
lower.
cost
It's
effective. So yeah. So
40%
it's all
off
right.
of
Water under the
that.
bridge. Don't worry, a couple
Yeah.
pennies now. Yeah, I think all of that, when we think about like what drives a country's culture or a province or a state's culture, I think family has a lot to do with that. And so
Mhm.
when we think about fundamentally pregnancy and parental leave, and I love that there's this, component for the non-childbearing parent, uh, and the leave that they receive. I love that because one of the biggest challenges can be that women then feel that setback in their
Yep.
careers because they're taking the time, potentially multiple times over the course of their career, depending on how many children they have, to take those leaves. And so there's this, it's not necessarily an equality thing, it's an equity thing to
Yeah.
ensure that there's some sort of balance in the workforce. So I really, that's really interesting. And all of that, again, to come back to this original point, all of that is to say that culturally, our countries are really some not fully defined by, but can be defined by or even changed or adapted based on some of those policies that
Yep.
help to build families. Because even when families feel, housing insecurity or food
Yeah.
insecurity, that really deeply affects their experience, which also then resonates and reverberates kind of outside and into
Yep.
their own communities. And that can, we see a lot of that globally. It's not just a US issue or a Canadian issue, but I do think that when companies are looking at hiring globally, there is always that cultural significance that needs to be understood or at least factored in. And
Yeah.
while they might not be the experts to know what that cultural difference is or significance is, there's someone like you or your team who can help them
Yeah.
navigate that, which is really helpful.
Yeah, no, we have a couple companies in the US who have one or two people in Canada, which you're like, well, how do we work that with payroll? How do we work that with Canada Revenue Agency? How do we work that with all of those pieces? And it seems to be like a hurdle. And you're like, it's actually easier than what you think it is. And it's really simple for us to run payroll for one employee we do a lot with nonprofits. Nonprofits seem to have this
Mm,
um, global reach as well. So a lot of our clients who are in the US who have one Canadian person, we help them out with that and make sure that everything is set up to be legitimately in and reduce the risk of the US employer by knowing what's going on with that
right.
individual.
Right. Amazing. Well, this has been very insightful. And I think we all are, while we're not Canadian experts necessarily, we're one step closer to really understanding our friends north of the border. And so, Laura, I really appreciate you joining the podcast and sharing all of your insights and experiences, even with your own clients. And I think it's really important for everyone as they think about their careers to, think beyond the scope of their own communities, their own states, their own country. And that goes for people outside of the US too. So with that, where can everyone connect with you, learn more about Essential HR, and find some more resources on you?
Yeah, so our website, essentialhr.ca. We're on Instagram at the same handle, essentialhr.ca. We keep it light and fun. HR can be heavy enough that we love a lot of office memes, I'll be honest. And LinkedIn is the same as well, essentialhr.ca.
Amazing. Well, we'll have all of that linked in the show notes. Thank you so much again for your time, and all of the insights you've shared with us this week. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Traci. It was awesome being here.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.